Alright, welcome back to Curriculum Development EIBI. This is video part 3. We're beginning with some ASR. So ASR number 1, individualized curriculum is a critical feature of A, EIBI, B, classroom instruction supports, or C, both. A couple more seconds. Alright, I'll close the poll and the answer here is C, both. ASR 2, which was mentioned as a critical feature of effective EIBI? Was it A, supervision intensity, B, supervision integrity, or C, supervision quality? A couple more seconds. Alright, I'll close the poll and the answer is C, supervision quality. ASR 3, the best EIBI outcomes are believed to result from high quality EIBI for A, 20 hours per week for 1 to 2 years, B, 30 hours per week for 2 or more years, C, 40 hours per week for at least 2 years, or D, 30 hours per week for 1 to 2 years. A couple more seconds. Alright, I'll close the poll and the answer is B, 30 hours per week for 2 or more years. ASR 4, early intervention provided by an early childhood specialist, speech therapist, or occupational therapist. Is it EIBI? A, yes. B, no. A couple more seconds. Alright, I'll close the poll and the answer is B. No. It's not ABA, it's not EIBI. ASR 5. Treatment intensity is A, a factor in deciding what to teach. B, a step towards linking assessment results with curriculum. C, a feature of effective EIBI, or D, a variable to consider when deciding what to teach. A couple more seconds. Okay, I'll close the poll and the answer is C, a feature of effective EIBI. Alright, the next section is how to link the results of assessment to curriculum, or linking curriculum to assessment. Now there are 4 steps for linking assessment results to a curriculum. The first is selecting a comprehensive assessment. The second is conducting the assessment. The third is deciding what to teach. And the fourth is designing and customizing lessons as deciding how to teach. The first that we'll cover is selecting a comprehensive assessment. There are 5 things to know about selecting a comprehensive assessment. And we'll look at each of these in detail. The first is choosing 1 or more assessments. The second is advantages of a comprehensive assessment. Assessing all skill domains spanning from infancy to the child's chronological age. The domains of functioning and variables related to choosing an assessment. The first step is to select a comprehensive assessment of the child's mastered skills and skill deficits, which means obtain present or current levels of functioning. So you should choose 1 or more assessments that assess all areas of human functioning, assess skills from infancy to the child's chronological age, an assessment that considers function. In other words, the way the items or questions in the assessment are worded, they would lead you to focus on the function of behavior rather than its structure alone. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. And then link skills to specific lessons. So later I'm going to show you something called PEAK, and it's an assessment and a curriculum. So it's an example of assessment with links to specific lessons. I'll show you that later. And also choose 1 or more assessments that identify strengths, weaknesses, and interests of the child or the client. Try to choose 1 that tracks progress in some way, and 1 that allows flexible measurement methods. For example, allows you to use both indirect assessments, so you can ask people if the child can do a particular skill or for particular behaviors in their repertoire, or you can also observe for yourself to see if the child can perform the skill or the behavior. And then choose one or more assessments that generates an overall picture of the child's current functioning. Lastly, one that gives an impression of how far the child is behind developmentally. Alright, so it'll be great to choose one assessment or multiple assessments that when you put them together, they have all of these characteristics. You want to look for all of these things. This is what we mean by comprehensive assessment. Advantages of a comprehensive assessment are that it avoids a cookbook curriculum or a cookbook approach that's not based on the child's individual needs, but a standardized curriculum applied to all children based on a step-by-step manual. Now I'll tell you, unfortunately, it's not uncommon to find yourself in an ABA agency where they have a manual or they have a binder of programs and they have standardized materials, and all of the children go through using the same materials and they're taught the same way and the same programs or skills are taught in the same sequence, and that's the case for the majority or all of the kids. And in fact, it was kind of like that for the first agency I worked for, even though they were amazing, they were wonderful. As I reflect back, they were a great company. But they kind of took this cookbook approach. And in my opinion, that tends to happen when a company grows too fast. And that's a way of, it's an attempt at quality control. In other words, you know, if you're a BCBA and you have several clients and then you hire someone, now you have an employee. You have some time to train that employee to do things, you know, to transfer your skills to them. And then they take on clients, and now you've got clients. Then you hire someone else, and then you train them, and now they have clients. But you can only provide, you know, oversight or supervision so much to each of those two employees. Then you have a third employee, and a fourth, and a fifth, and you try to do, companies try to do this pyramidal training, where senior members of the company or agency move up, and they train people under them, right? But if that happens too fast, and there's not enough time for the more experienced people to transfer their skills to the less experienced, then what happens is in order to try to compensate for the lack of time to directly train people, the agency ends up developing a manual or trying to standardize things. So that may also be a product of just really high demand for very limited availability of ABA services. Okay. Anyways, you want to avoid that. Lessons that are inappropriate because the child lacks prerequisite skills, that's what a cookbook approach is. Okay. So teaching skills that are of no use to the child or won't be used regularly, you want to avoid that. Okay, a comprehensive assessment will help you avoid that. Comprehensive assessment will help you avoid a lopsided curriculum that neglects some skill domains over others. For example, strictly teaching a child verbal behavior but leaving no time for teaching play skills. Or, and this is somewhat common, is to teach a child all tasks, to really focus on tasks, but fail to expand their manding repertoire. So they can describe the environment and comment, but they can't ask for the preferred items, activities, and people. Placing a client on an independent workstation for too much of the day, which of course is going to negatively impact their socialization. And then it's not uncommon for skills to be taught and practiced with a therapist, or other adults, but not peers. All right, so a comprehensive assessment will help you avoid that. Also, you want to assess all an assessment that'll allow you to assess all skill domains spanning from infancy to the child's chronological age. Okay, and it's important in particular to consider that the child with autism will exhibit a current repertoire that doesn't match their chronological age. Remember, they're not on a typically developing they're not on a typical developmental trajectory. Children with autism will usually exhibit splinter skills, which means they have great strengths in some areas and deficits in others. For example, they can read really well for their age, but they can't tie their shoes. Okay. And so, we've emphasized it's important to assess all skill domains. And so now we're going to go into detail with each of those domains. Social, motor, language, adaptive play, executive functioning, cognition, and academic skills. So let's look at social skills first. Now, social skills deficits are a core feature of autism spectrum disorders, so it's important that you target goals in early intensive behavioral intervention that pertain to social skills. That's critical. It's important for children to form and maintain mutually meaningful relationships with family and friends. Ultimately, down the road, obtain and keep a job, learn efficiently from others, and more. Right? So, examples of social skills include gesturing to objects or people of interest, appropriate use of body language, eye contact, responding appropriately to others' emotional expressions, using facial expressions, reciprocating social interactions, and more. Just some examples of some social skills. We could go on and on there, right? So it's important to teach social skills that are cumulative in complexity and usefulness, and relevant to current or impending experiences or environmental demands. So that's saying two things. One, teach first things first. Teach prerequisite social skills before you teach more complicated ones. Two, consider the environment where the child lives and works and plays. Well, works if they're a teenager, but we're talking really young kids in early intensive behavioral intervention, so where they play, where they go to school, where they spend most of their time. Consider all the context that they're going to spend their time throughout the day. Kind of like when you would conduct an ecological assessment, right? So that's because you got to give them the social skills that they're going to need to be successful in those everyday settings. So, for example, if a child still needs to learn to follow gestures or to use gestures or imitate others' actions, they won't benefit from instruction in identifying facial expressions in pictures. If a child is largely vocally verbal, and learning how to write or talk about events and stories, okay, then it makes sense to teach the child to identify and discriminate between facial expressions, because facial expressions provide important information in stories with pictures of people. Right? So it makes sense there. Motor skills. Although not a core feature of autism, many children show delays or deficits in motor skills, and it's quite uncommon for those to be overlooked by practitioners in children with autism. Motor skills are important for accomplishing daily tasks and activities, mobility and inclusion in community settings and group activities. Examples of motor skills targets can be classified as gross motor, fine motor, oral motor, visual motor, and you can further classify some of these motor skills as with or without objects. That's for gross, fine, and oral motor. So in other words, you can have gross motor with objects, fine motor with objects, oral motor with objects, such as spoons and forks. Gross motor. Reaching for objects, jumping, walking, standing, sitting in a chair, waving, clapping, catching a ball. Fine motor skills include pressing buttons, holding a pencil, using thread, picking up coins, picking up small puzzle pieces, using a toothbrush, playing with Play-Doh, imitating actions such as touching two index fingers together, thumbing through pages of a text, clicking a mouse, typing. Oral motor skills, lip closure after taking a bite, chewing, moving food around the mouth for chewing, swallowing, coordinating the muscles for speech sound production, using a straw, blowing a kiss, like that. Visual motor, smooth coordination of gaze with both eyes, tracking an object's movement and other aspects of visual perception, or we might say visual responding. Now, similar to social skills, it's important to teach motor skills that are cumulative in complexity and usefulness, and relevant to current or impending experiences or environmental demands. In other words, teach prerequisite motor skills first, and teach motor skills that are relevant to the context that are frequently encountered by the learner. So, for example, if a child exhibits a lack of chewing skills, they aren't ready to learn the motor skills for self-feeding with utensils. For example, after teaching fine motor skills of picking up very small items, such as a toothpick, the learner then may benefit from instruction in tying shoes, which requires fine motor skills. For example, for a child to benefit instruction in riding a bike, you would teach them the motor skills to get on and off the bike safely, to hold on to the handles, and perhaps to ask for help. Language. Communication delays and deficits, also known as verbal behavior deficiencies, are a core feature of autism. Now, the adverse effects of language delays and deficits are widespread throughout life. It's associated with problems with play, social interaction, meal times, reading, writing, math, and more. And when children have severe language delays or deficits, they're more likely to engage in challenging behavior. A large portion of a child's intervention should focus on teaching and strengthening their verbal repertoire in ways that produce immediate large improvements in quality of life. In early intensive behavioral intervention, one of the first verbal operants you should target is the man. It's really critical to teach a child to be able to spontaneously request preferred items and activities and avoidance of aversive situations and request attention from people. That's critical. And if they don't have that skill, or let's say, maybe you need to teach a prerequisite, which would be echoic responding, where they're able to copy words that other people say, so that you can use differential reinforcement, prompting and prompt fading, to turn that echoic response into a vocal man. If they don't have, if they're not able to copy others' speech sounds so that you can use vocal man training, then you should consider whether they have good fine or gross motor skills. If they have good gross motor skills but not fine motor skills, well then maybe you should teach them to do picture exchange or exchange objects that have pictures corresponding to preferred items, activities, or people. If they have good fine motor, then you may be able to use hand-over-hand prompting to teach signs or finger spelling. And there are some other considerations as well. Now, examples of skill target, but we won't get into it. Examples of skill targets include reducing echolalia. That's when a child repeats speech sounds for no apparent reason, or in other words, doesn't use the speech sounds they're saying to interact with other people. Teaching mands, tacts, intraverbals, codics, these are all verbal operants. So codics include textual responding and transcription. Duplics include memetics, echoics, and copying text. Autoclitics, bringing verbal operants under appropriate stimulus control. Reducing excessive manding, and replacing challenging behavior with appropriate man topographies, such as in function-based intervention using functional communication training. Now, similar to motor skills, it's important to teach verbal skills that are cumulative in complexity and usefulness, and relevant to current or impending experiences or environmental demands. That means teach first things first, teach prerequisite skills first, and teach verbal skills they'll use in frequently encountered contexts. So, for example, teach echoics before teaching vocal commands, teach tacts before teaching interverbals. So tacts are descriptions or labeling the environment. Interverbals is similar to conversation. For example, teach 50 to 100 commands for items, activities, and people before targeting words like please, thank you, and more. For example, teaching listener skills or receptive language does not necessarily lead to expressive language or speaker skills. That's something important to note, that receptive language or listener skills is not necessarily a prerequisite to verbal skill development. However, typically developing children acquire listener skills much faster than vocal verbal behavior. Okay, typically developing children are able to follow many more instructions and commands than they are able to ask for things in the environment. Okay, initially. So teaching a strong listener repertoire simultaneously with teaching a speaker repertoire is important when developing a curriculum to target verbal skills. Adaptive. Although not a core feature of autism, many children would show delays or deficits in adaptive behavior. Adaptive behavior can be described using the mnemonic SIGHT. So adaptive behavior is any behavior that's a skill that enables the learner to achieve increased independence. The skills commensurate with typically developing learners of a similar age. And the skill is matched to the learner's environment. Right? So SIGHT, skill, independence, typically developing peers, environment. Is it adaptive behavior? If you're wondering if something is adaptive, ask yourself if they can't do it themselves, will someone have to do it for them? If the answer is yes, the skill is adaptive. Failure to develop adaptive behavior needed to be successful in increasingly demanding environments as a child ages results in dependence on others, difficulties transitioning across stages of schooling, and leads to challenging behavior. Now, children must be taught age-appropriate adaptive behavior to enable them to complete daily living skills independently. And you can classify daily living skills as personal, domestic, community, and safety skills. Now, examples of personal skills are dressing and toileting. Examples of domestic skills are cleaning, setting and clearing the table at mealtimes, making the bed, sweeping, vacuuming. Examples of community skills are staying seated in a movie theater, participating in grocery shopping, waiting in line at the checkout, whispering in the library, paying for instead of stealing items at the store, wearing a seatbelt, and swimming. You might, we might move wearing a seatbelt down to this classification, safety skills. All right, safety skills are looking both ways before crossing the street, refusing to travel with strangers, walking safely with scissors, staying within school grounds, holding on to the chains when when a child is swinging, just being able to hold on the chains, otherwise they're going to fall off the swing. Holding hands while walking in the parking lot. All right, so those are all daily living skills, and so each of these would be examples of adaptive behavior, to the extent that if a learner could not do these independently, and someone would have to do it for them. Okay. Personal, domestic, community, and safety skills are a type of daily living skills. Next is play, but we'll save that for the next video part. See you then.